Good. Welcome, everyone. As usual, we will be given a couple of minutes, maybe 1 minute, for folks to continue joining. We are very, very excited. So yeah, I'm seeing people joining now. So as usual, we'll save you the pain of elevator music, but maybe we can kick off with, can you share where are you joining from today? Where are you based? Usually we have a very global audience. So excited to see that coming through. Seattle, I love it. Zimbabwe, Belgium, London, Malaysia, Paris, cool. Dallas, Brazil, Argentina, Tennessee, Canada, Oklahoma, Dublin. Yeah, Bangalore, awesome. Hey, it's always a blast to see such a global audience and this presence. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Um, I think we can briefly, in 30 seconds, kick off so that everybody's here. I'm based in New York, as you know. I'm right now in Barcelona, so I'm joining from Barcelona today. It's very warm. It's very warm these days. Cool. Without further ado, now that folks are on the room, hello and welcome to the third and final session of our masterclass series with Christian Wattig. We are so excited. We're going to be covering everything you need to do in order to increase the quality of your decisions. Let's just remember, macroeconomic uncertainty is through the roof. It's at peak levels. And the planning season, the annual budgeting season is just approaching, and you want to lay the right strong foundations to navigate it. As you know, today, most finance leaders are solving for operational speed. It's a critical KPI these days. And of course, the foundation of operational speed is faster decisions. And the question, the provocation for us in finance is how do we drive faster decisions with a high level of confidence? Better decisions that just happen faster across the company. Cool. I'm your host. I'm Julio Martinez, co-founder and CEO of Abacum. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's session. It's going to be a blast. And then Christian is going to be sharing with us something very special. And then Nerf and your face today with us as well. Look, hey, by the way, if it's logistics, if it's your first time joining us, don't worry. You'll have access to the recording post session. Everybody asks about it, and then people consume as well later on. So no worries. You don't need to take notes or anything. Like recording will be open to everyone. And in this 60 minutes masterclass, Christian will cover today financial modeling on and how mastering it can support your decision making, right? And this is being carved out with from one of his amazing courses. So I would pay a lot of attention. I think it will be very beneficial for everyone here. As well, joining us today, we have Nerf from the Abacum team, who brings a wealth of experience in FP&A and technical roles, right? So an expert as well. And he will be covering some of the foundation elements that Christian is talking about, and he will be covering in a deck directly in the Abacum platform, right? So bringing everything to life. And then, of course, as usual, we will wrap things up with an audience Q&A. So please, be proactive, always engaging. You always are, but again, submit any question in the chat, and then we'll address them towards the end. Cool. Christian needs no introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce him for just in case there is somebody new in the audience. Christian Wattig is an FP&A expert with over a decade of leadership experience at multinational companies and fast-growing tech startups. Today, Christian directs the FP&A certificate program at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania and shares his insights through his own training programs as the founder of FP&A Prep and on LinkedIn. Over 30,000 finance professionals and business leaders to subscribe to his newsletter, FP&A Tuesday. Christian, it's a blast to have you today with us once more. And also, Nerf, welcome to the show. We're also very excited to have you here today.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here again.
Yeah, awesome. Nerf.
Absolute pleasure to be here as well, and very keen to show you all Abacum and answer any questions you all have.
Cool. Let's introduce some of our pool questions that always allow us to take the temperature. Um, there you go. You should be seeing them now. Those are going to be very easy for you, but still easy to answer, difficult to implement in practice. So hopefully that's going to also give us some context, particularly Christian at the beginning, and then Nerv as to how to where to focus the presentation. Remember, don't shy. Christian brings a wealth of experience in FP&A. He is sharing some content from his own training programs. So this is high quality content brought to you today. So don't be shy. Don't let him leave today without your questions being answered. Cool. Okay, so there you go. Cool. Well, this is, maybe I'm not very surprised, but this is very tight here. ROI, payback period, 40 and almost 40 with DCF. Sensitivity analysis, customer lifetime value, interesting to see it. That's interesting. And then, of course, regularly and occasionally. Okay.
Perfect.
Chris, the floor is yours. Any thoughts? Let us know. Cool.
Thank you. Thank you. No, good to see that so many are already using ROI and NPV. That will make it easier for you to participate in this workshop. So let me share my screen here. The way this works, if you're familiar with my, oh, that's the wrong one. If you're familiar with my webinars, it's going to be a little bit different today because actually this is a workshop. What it means is that you will participate here. I will ask you a number of questions and you have the chance to share what you know, and that will make it more engaging for you. And it's also going to give you a taste of what it's like if I'm, doing this training at companies like I've done in the past with Google, with Merck, with Lowe's. So you see what that's like. Questions are always welcome. We'll reserve time in the end to answer them as well. And we'll also share a financial modeling best practice template at the end today. So let's dive in. When it comes to financial modeling, before you actually jump into Excel and open up your spreadsheet and go into the numbers, it's important to take a step back and think about which type of financial model should I be building, and am I building the right one? Because you need to make sure that there's a fit between business case and the financial model type. The business case is the decision you're trying to evaluate, whether that's investing into new machines, launching a new product, which has costs involved with it, entering a new market, building a new feature. So you need to think about what's the financial model type to use. Let's start with a warm-up question for you. What happens if you don't have a good fit between the financial model type and the business case? If you use the wrong financial type of financial model? By the way, I have the common FP&A model types down below here. You can type it in the chat. What happens if you use the wrong financial model type? Jacob says garbage in, garbage out. Canavaggio says wrong decision. Yeah, so that's the first reason why you need to pick the right model. You might get inaccurate results, but there's another reason, and that's that if you always default to the most complicated financial model type, the discounted cash flow model, for example, is relatively complex, then you might not get buy-in from cross-functional leaders. Because building the financial model is just step one in the process. The next step is to convince the cross-functional leadership team that your recommendation coming out of the model is what they should implement. And if the model is so complex that they don't really understand how you got to your point, leaders that don't have a finance background, then you might not be as convincing. So it's important to know when a less complex financial model type is sufficient. So let's dive in and look at the different model types. Let's start with ROI, return on investment. I saw in the poll that 40% of you have used that before. So how does ROI work? How would you explain that in simple terms? How does ROI work? Carnavaggio says you analyze how long it takes to get your money back. Yeah. Someone add to that? Invest something and get something in return. I actually really like that. It's a very simple definition, but it's to the point. Measures the true value, the net profit divided by cost. Thank you, Mark. Yeah. So ROI is a simple formula where you take the revenue associated with the investment divided by the cost of the investment, or you take the net returns, the net profit of the investment divided by the investment. If you use revenue for the formula, you want to get a ratio that's higher than 1. If you use net returns on the investment to calculate this, you want to get an ROI that's bigger than 0. This metric is very popular. It's commonly used. Why is it very popular? Why is ROI a popular method for analyzing investment opportunities? I hinted it already. Thank you, Eric, because it's simple, right? It's simple, it's straightforward, it's easy to understand. Thank you, Jacob. So you don't need to have a degree in finance to understand how this works. And what's payback? It's closely related to ROI. How does payback work? How long does it take to recover? How long does it take to break even? Thank you, Everett. Thank you, Adarsh. And by the way, if I mispronounce anyone's first name, I apologize in advance. So yeah, payback expresses how long it takes until an investment is paid back in full. There are a few different ways to calculate it. The easiest way is you take 12 divided by the ROI. That's the payback. And yeah, it gives you the number of months that you need to wait or that you need to get your cash flows until the cash you collected from the investment is equal to what you invested into it to make this happen. In addition to evaluating an investment opportunity, payback can be used for something else, and companies use it to make other decisions as well. Does anyone have an idea of what payback is also used for? In addition to evaluating whether or not to go forward with an investment? Mark, it has to do with marketing campaigns. Yes, yes. Does anyone know what payback has to do with marketing campaigns? So payback is often used to also evaluate whether we are spending enough on something like marketing. So many companies have a payback target on their marketing investment where they say, okay, it should be less than a year. That's a common target for payback. But then at the same time, if you have a payback on a new marketing or on your marketing spend on average, that's say 5 months only, then that tells you that maybe we are not investing enough into long-term initiatives, like investing in your brand marketing, in driving brand awareness. Those campaigns that don't immediately pay back, but you want to make sure that you find a good balance between short-term investments and long-term investments, and payback can help you find that right balance. It's often used for that. But ROI and payback are commonly used, but there's a challenge that you run into when you try to do that in practice. What makes doing this actually difficult? Because the formula itself is easy, but when you go and calculate that yourself for an investment, you run into a problem. What's the problem you run into? Michael mentioned time value of money. I'll talk about that in a moment. I'm referring to something else here. Yeah, Vincent, revenue attribution, exactly. Because the thing is, if I take it back to the formula looks simple on paper, right? You only need to have the revenue and the cost of the investment. Typically, getting the cost of the investment is not that difficult, right? People can give you an estimate on how much more headcount you need to do this, what the machines cost, what the development R&D cost is, but the revenue that's attributed to that specific thing can be difficult to estimate and even more difficult to track after the fact, because of course we always want to then, after we launched the initiative, to look back and see how do our actual results compare to what we have in the model, in the forecast. And so the reason that that's challenging is because most companies do many things in parallel, right? They do a lot of things that they hope will drive revenue. So for example, they have an advertising campaign running on social media, and at the same time, maybe they do podcasts. At the same time, they have TV. At the same time, they're launching a new AI feature that they hope would drive more signups to the software, for example, if we're taking a software company. And it can be quite challenging to figure out how much of that revenue increase that we're seeing is actually attributed to the thing we're trying to analyze, right? How much has our new TV campaign impacted last quarter's revenue growth is a typical question. And what you can do here is you need to isolate that impact. And you can either do it yourself or you can either partner with experts. That's where you purchase something that's called marketing mix model from a third party. Companies like Nielsen, Kantar, or Ipsos provide that. It's basically a sophisticated statistical model that tries to delayer, the different things you're doing. You can hire a data scientist. I worked at a company that had, a large data science team, and they built this model in-house. But you can also do it yourself. You can choose what's called a last touch attribution model, where you say, well, I'll radically simplify that problem and say, whatever ad or whatever thing people saw last before they made a purchase, that's where I attribute the revenue to. You might think, oh, this is overly simplified. But the interesting and I thought that too for a long time until, we really tried to get around that. And the difficulty is that sometimes even when you ask people, hey, why did you subscribe to our software? Why did you buy this product? They sometimes also don't know, right? And they don't know to which degree what different things they saw influenced them. So it definitely is an art and a science. And when it comes to revenue attribution, I would even say it's even more so than an art. That's not to say that you shouldn't try to approach it scientifically. So for example, a smart way to approach this is to have separate your data between a control and a treatment group. So for example, you launched the new feature only in a given market. In the other market or the other region that's comparable, you don't do anything different. And then you see how much that by looking at the differences, by how much that market improves in revenue. That's a way to do it. But you have to set these experiments up beforehand and really, do this carefully. So that's ROI, what makes ROI difficult. But sometimes ROI is insufficient. And someone of you mentioned that already, so I'm not going to ask the question again. Who was it? The time value of money, right? So the time value of money is tricky here. Let me see. Michael Bell said that. Because the thing is, simple ROI is insufficient if the time horizon is more than a year or you have recurring revenues. If you have recurring revenues, you also need to take brand loyalty into account. I'll get to that in a moment. But if your time horizon is more than a year, you want to take the time value of money into account. And that means that you need to do a discounted cash flow model. So what's a discounted cash flow model? How does the time value of money work? Well, if I give you $1,000 today, that's worth more to you than $1,000 you get in a year from now. Because the $1,000 you get today, you can invest into an alternative investment. You can buy something else for it. You can invest it in the stock market. And then in a year from now, that $1,000 may be worth $1,200, right? But the $1,000 you get in a year is only $1,000. So how discounted cash flow models work is that they discount future cash flows. It's like an interest rate, but the opposite, right? You have a discount rate that makes cash flows that you get in the future less valuable than cash flows that you get now. And then you calculate what's called a net present value, NPV for short. And that NPV is 0 if your investments are equal to the present value of your returns, okay? That's a textbook definition. But I'm always bringing in the practitioner approach. And I saw in the poll that many of you are familiar with NPV. So I want to, take it a step further and ask you, what should you do if the NPV of a project is exactly 0? Do you recommend to go forward with it? Or put differently, in which circumstances would you go forward with an investment that has an NPV of 0? You need to evaluate against it if it brings LTV. Okay. So you can combine LTV with discounted cash flow modeling, by the way. Long-term value, there's no better alternative. Okay, that is sometimes the case. Strategic consideration. So long-term value, strategic consideration, you're referring to things that we can't include in the model, right? Long-term impacts, sustainability impacts, or sometimes things like you're bringing on a new automation tool and what's the impact on employee morale, right? It's sometimes difficult to quantify, but it's definitely there. So that might lead you to do a model that has an NPV of 0. Or, and I actually haven't seen that in the chat, when it depends on how you're accounting for the risk in the model, right? Because we should always include buffer for unknown risks, for things that we can't foresee, because projects get delayed. You might run into issues that require to invest more than you originally thought. And if we don't put in any of these buffers for unknown unknowns, then basically you're assuming that nothing will go wrong, right? That for sure everything will go according to plan, which it never does. So you have to build those buffers in. And if you're conservative with these buffers, then you might say, okay, an NPV that's close to 0 is actually good enough because I have accounted for the risk and it's a balanced recommendation. Really quickly, some terms you need to know here are weighted average cost of capital. If you've ever built an NPV model before, you came across this, that's what's used as the discount rate most of the time. It sounds fancy, but it's essentially just the expectation of what your equity holders and your debt holders expect in terms of a rate of return, right? Because the discount rate is essentially the alternative investment, the average alternative investment. And so it needs to satisfy what equity holders and debt holders expect your company to deliver. That's all that WACC is. Can be, as Cannovaccio says, be very difficult to calculate, especially if you're a private company. I'm not going into that because it gets very technical, and I would actually advise that you work with a professional to calculate that and get, a third party to help you with that if you're a private company. But that's what's being used in a discounted cash flow model. Essentially, it's the average alternative investment that you're doing. And that's what we use at its discount rate. Also good to know is that there's also something called IRR, the internal rate of return, because that's the percentage of your returns as a rate, expressed as a rate, right? NPV is the absolute amount, IRR is the percentage, and the discount rate, it's a discount rate where the NPV is 0. So in other words, if your discount rate is 5%, your NPV is 0, then your IRR would also have to be 5%. Okay. So now the question is, why do you even need IRR if you already have NPV, right? And I want to share an example here with you. Let's say we have two investments. We have an option A where you open a new store in the current market. You make $1 million investment, 60,000 NPV, 12% internal rate of return, what the project returns. And then an option B where you open a new store in a new market. So that's the difference. Higher investment, higher NPV, higher IRR. But which option would you choose? Because obviously, option B is a bit more risky, right? If you go into a new market, it's more risky. So the question for you is, would you choose option A? Would you choose option B? Or would you say, okay, I need more information. There's something here I'm missing. You can type in the chat A, B, or more info. A, B, or more info. Okay. Good. Most people say more info. Some people say B. So technically B has the high investment and higher NPV, but what you need to consider is the risk of the investments. So option A, and that's where the hurdle rate comes in. The hurdle rate is basically the target internal rate of return that the company decides these kinds of investments should have. And option B has a higher risk, and so it has a higher hurdle rate, whereas option A has a lower hurdle rate and it meets that hurdle rate, so we need to go ahead. Very important concept. Now, that was a quick introduction to discounted cash flow and some important concepts here. Now I want to shift gears and talk about sensitivity modeling. And I'm sure most of you are familiar. I saw in the poll you're familiar with this. So we'll go over this very quickly. What is sensitivity modeling? Well, you answer questions like, when do we break even if our monthly costs don't increase? What's the NPV if sales are up by 10%? Does our LTV still make sense if customer acquisition costs 20% higher? Can we spend 50,000 more if marketing and still have an ROI bigger than 1? And the sensitivity modeling is super important because it helps you understand the risk inherent in your model, right? Because if you can look at what point does my ROI become negative, my NPV becomes less than 0, how much can I lose in terms of sales forecast, and how much more can I spend in terms of investment? So running sensitivity is super, super important to quantify the risk. And actually, what I would like to do now is hand it over to Nerv and show you what sensitivity modeling can look like in Abacum. So you see a real example here. So handing it over to Nerv.
Amazing. Thanks, Christian. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know when you all can see it. Perfect, team. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Yep. Lovely. Okay, very good. So, team, what I'll be doing today is doing a ROI calculation build in the system, right? And I'll also do some sensitivity analysis, how we can create versions, and so on and so forth. So for the folks that aren't very familiar with Abacum, think of Abacum as the evolution of your planning. So folks that are stuck in Excel with broken formulas, multiple versions, what Abacum tries to do and solves is essentially creates your planning more fun and less arduous. So let's look at some examples here of a very blank environment. And I believe I have 10 minutes to prove out something for you. So bear with me here. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to build a completely new model and build a scenario and version analysis for you. So what do I have in my blank space here? This is where we can connect your different source systems, and we have a plethora of source systems we can connect to and bring data into Abacum, right? And once connected, I actually loaded in a blank data set earlier. This is where we would house all your different data sets and sources, right? So looking at this data set, let's go in there, review this. You'll notice I have transactional ID. So it's like a project transactional data set with project ID, project manager, locations, and so on and so forth. I want you to notice this, that we have project ID and location IDs only. On top of this raw data, you can actually build hierarchies. So for example, if I look at my location ID, this is what I have in my source system. In the dimension section, and this is where I would house my hierarchies, I have 3 different hierarchies. One of them is my account hierarchy, which is basically taking the account ID from my source data and building essentially parent accounts or parent groupings on top of that. Location's the same logic. So this is what's coming from my source system. And I'm basically building this on top of that, right? So why are we doing this? This gives you further paradigms on how you can slice and dice and report and plan on your data, not just what's coming from your source systems, right? Lovely. So brought the data in, mapped it with hierarchies. This is where we have our different versions and scenarios. So think of your versions as like your 1 plus 11, 2 plus 10, so on and so forth. And underneath your versions is where you would have your scenarios, like your best case scenarios, worst case scenarios, right? Right now I have a forecast 2025 and I have a default scenario. We'll create a scenario as well quickly. And this is where we would create our models. So think of these as like Excel tabs, right? So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to call this let's call this a metrics model. Lovely. So right off the bat, this would be like our blank canvas for modeling. So I'm going to go into my calculations, click on this plus button here, and I'm going to say create variable. Think of variable as a metric essentially, right? So variables could be something like revenue. So I'm going to say create variable, and I am going to do revenue. Lovely. So this is the formula for my actuals. So very simple. I'm going to click on this pencil, and I'm going to say sum amount, which is from my data set, right? Project transactions data set, where account type is revenue. Simple as that, right? As I did that, you'll see there's a bunch of dimensions that popped up here, right? So I'm going to show you. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to save this. And right now, you'll notice that I have this data coming through from my source system, all well and good. But I have no dimensionality to that, which makes no sense because then why would I even need a system, right? So that's where the power of Abacum comes into play. That's where the dimensions can be activated. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to click on this. I'm going to click on dimensions and let's add in, I'm going to do region. I'm going to do country and I'll do project as well. Lovely. Let's just do that for now. So as you can see, these are activated, right? And now, perfect. Now I'm going to go and also create a cost component as well. So same logic. I'm going to go create. I'm going to do cost. And I can just copy this formula, put it in there, and just click on this. And instead of revenue, I'm going to change that to cost. Right? Lovely. And the last one I want to do is ROI. And in this particular instance, I'm just going to do like a gross return multiple. So I'm going to go call this ROI gross return multiple. Perfect. And I'm going to save these in here. Perfect. So how do I get my gross return multiple? Very simple. Click on my pencil, do revenue divided by my cost. And I can put this in brackets. I don't have to multiply by 100, but if you want to, you can go in there, multiply by 100. And you can see these dimensions are available for me to activate. I'm not going to do that for now. I'll show you why. And I'm going to click save. Perfect. So we have all of these components in here. We have region, country, and project. There's no dimensions activated here, and there's no dimensions activated here. You can actually click these two, right? And go in there and do a mass activation as well, right? So region, country, project. And I'm going to apply to that as well. Perfect. So all of these are activated. Now you can see as I move to my right, I can also go in there and add a percentage to this as well. Perfect. So that's all perfectly done. And as revenue comes in, right, you can see it goes up slowly. Next thing I want to do is basically go into my spaces and essentially create a view. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to create a space and I'm going to call this. So these emojis you can change. It does not have to be a donut for everything, right? So I can go and call this ROI space or something along those lines, right? And I'll go in here, do a forward slash, and I can actually create a chart. So I'm going to create a chart in here, right? I'm going to create an empty chart and I can call this ROI. And let's do in this, go to my metrics model. So think of this as a massive pivot table, basically, right? I'm going to get my ROI, apply that in there. Perfect. So that's my ROI. I can go change the graph types, the chart types. So for now, I'm going to go do like a little chart like that. Perfect. And I'll save that. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward, nothing too crazy. What's really nice about this now is when I want to do some sensitivity and scenario analysis, I can pop back into my model, go in here, right? And I can essentially go and say add assumptions. So let's do a growth rate. I'm going to add a growth rate assumption. Right click on this. Sorry, save this first of all. Perfect. And I can go and add a manual input. So with the growth rates as well, you can use like temporal data. So like start date, end dates, yearly constants. I'm lazy. So I'm going to go in there. I'm going to do a constant and I'm going to put like a 1.5% growth rate, right? Perfect. And I'm just going to average on that. Lovely. So perfect. So we have revenue and we have cost, right? So we need cost to extend to our forecast as well. So instead of me using a growth rate for this, I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to say auto forecast values and use our AI forecasting on this one, right? So there's a whole bunch of different methodologies and methods you can use. For now, I'm just going to use the standard AI forecast and I'm going to say generate. And this looks at the seasonality and the trend of historical data and applies that, right? Perfect. So I apply that for my cost and for my revenue, all I'm going to do is click on my pencil here and I'm going to say this line last month times my growth rate. Perfect. So if I scroll to my right team, right, you'll notice I have actuals, I have my forecast, I have my levels of detail I activated earlier, right? So you can keep drilling down into as much detail as you all would be keen on, right? And now, how do I play around with these growth rates and assumptions, right? If you recall, I have a basic forecast and a basic default scenario. I want to create a best case on this. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to create a scenario and I'm going to call this a best case scenario. Simple as that. Lovely. Now my best case scenario and a default case scenario. Make a note, I'm not going to create a new model for this. I just said duplicate my scenarios. I'll go back to my spaces, right? I'll go in here. And I'm just going to activate my best case scenario here as well. So go into my versions and variances. I'll change this version to be my forecast 2025 default. That's fine. I'll add a new one here and I'll call this my custom forecast 2025 best case, right? And I'm just going to change the time period. Let's do from the start of the year to the end of the year. And this is going to be 0. Perfect. All right, so I'll save this into the system, all well and good. And so I have no data right now, and that's totally fine. So I'll also just go duplicate this quickly. And I'm going to make this an input basically. So I'm going to call this ROI or revenue driver. Okay, awesome. And the only thing I need to change is I'm going to go to my variables. And instead of my gross return multiple, right, I'll get rid of that. And I am going to add a growth rate in there. Perfect. And just make that a table instead of graph because I want to input data into the system, right? So you could do a monthly. Like I said, I'm lazy, so I'm just going to go in there and just do a total, right? Instead of monthly. Perfect. And yeah, that should be fine. I'll also probably add a bit of different colorings to this if I want to. I could do that. Actually, let's do, yeah, that's fine. I'll just leave it as that for now. Maybe see more decimals. So you can format it any which way you want to, right? Perfect. So we have this. Let me just change this ROI chart. That's perfect. Let me go in there and change the colors here. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we have this right now, team. So I'm going to go into this one quickly. And I want to show you all something here. So my growth rate, right, is what we see here, 1.5. If I change this to my best case scenario, there's a little lilac icon that pops up, and that tells me that I can change my growth rates over here, right? So that's totally fine. But you'll notice when I pulled up my return on investment earlier, and even here, we can see that it's all blank. And why is that? Pretty straightforward reason for that is we don't have any formulas for my return on investment. So all you have to do is you don't have to duplicate the formula. Just do a button like that, save, and you can see your return on investment applied as well. Perfect. Now, if you go into spaces, you'll see that data pop up. Okay, all well and good. Last thing I want to do is now I want to change my best case scenario, right? So I can actually add a different color to this as well. Let's go in there, make it green, simple as that. And go in there and let's make this like 3% growth rate or something. Lilac color popped up and you can see like your different growth rates. Obviously, I put a very exorbitant rate. Let me do like 1.65 or something along those lines. Perfect. Yep. And I believe I finished under 10 minutes, hopefully. But yeah, that's how easy it is to kind of create these scalable sensitivity and scenario analysis components. Obviously, this is a very rudimentary example in terms of logic team. What's really nice about Abacum is any Excel logic you can think of. We also have custom logic. And I know, Christian, you mentioned about the revenue attribution as well. So we have nice formulas such as allocation formulas and things like that, which you can use to attribute data quite easily amongst different levels of detail, different time series of factors. Yeah, it's very scalable. Hopefully that painted a picture of how easy it is to build models with Abacum. Amazing. Over to you,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Nerv. It was super interesting to see how quickly you were able to put that together from scratch, essentially, and how easy it was to include also an AI forecast, right? You went over that quickly, but it's so helpful to have that in addition to, a driver-based forecast, to other ways of modeling the data. And then the other thing that impressed me was how easy it was to add additional dimensions, to cut the data in different areas. And then, of course, everything is connected to the cloud. You can make changes without losing anything. And there are definitely advantages over Excel there. At the same time, I know that many of you joining here are still also using Excel for modeling. And there are use cases where Excel shines. And so I wanted to now spend maybe 5-10 minutes introducing you to best practice model about different financial modeling standards. But before I go there, I see, Nerf, you have your hand up.
I do. Sorry, Kristen, you brought up a really good point there. I think one thing I'll be remiss if I don't mention is I did really go fast to the AI components, and that's basically scratching the surface of like Abacum's AI. So there's more AI on the data analysis. Kristen, you mentioned data science earlier too. So there's a lot of AI around that too. Then anomaly detection, principal component analysis, and a bunch of things like that. To your point, which makes Abacum a step above using Excel, right? So yeah, lovely. Thank you all.
Yeah. So For those of you who are still using Excel, super important to follow financial modeling standards, meaning building the model in Excel in a way that's robust, optimized for fast iteration, and ideally also in a way that has a small surface area for mistakes, right? Because it's so easy to make mistakes in Excel with typing things into formulas. It's another advantage for a tool like Abacum. But so what are some financial model standards? It's a question I want to ask you before I share a model I put together as an example that you can download. And before I walk you through how that model works, what would you say are some financial modeling standards in Excel?
Sorry, let me make sure I understood that question, Christian. Was it to me?
No, it's for everyone. So it's a question
Okay,
for
sorry.
everyone.
I thought you
Right?
said no. My apologies.
No, oh, sorry, Nerf. No, type in the chat. Nerf, you can also type in the chat if you like. Um, type in the chat, what's a financial modeling standard for you? How do you build your models in Excel? How do you make sure that you have that it's robust? And I'm already seeing a few come in. Enter data only once. Yes, Ben. Thank you. That's a really important point because otherwise you're essentially setting yourself up for failure if you're adding data in multiple areas. Max says in all caps, no plugs. McDonald's, sorry. No plugs. Yes. So what we mean with plugs is going into a cell that has a formula and then overriding that formula. Why would you do that? Well, maybe you're in a meeting, you get a quick question, and someone says, hey, I've just learned that logistics costs are 15% higher. How does it impact the ROI, or how does it impact the NPV? In Excel, you might struggle if you haven't set up your model properly. You might struggle to find ways to quickly make that update. And so you don't want to plug it. You don't want to override the formula because it comes back to bite you later. Ian says architecture is key, so it's easy to follow/audit. Yes, I will show you in a moment what we mean with that. Jesus says organized tabs, colored formats, audit for functionality, formula, Excel, and detailed calculation. Always add checks to your work. Yes, I'll also talk about that in a moment. Model should be printable. Okay, yes, if you're in a company that still prints things. Actually, for the last 5 or so years, I worked at companies that never printed anything, which was actually pretty nice. Inputs, calculations, outputs, exactly. You raised a number of really good points. So let me walk you through a model, and you can also grab that model here for yourself. And let me share my screen. So this model works in G Sheets and in Excel, depending on what you're using. And I'm sharing my screen here in G Sheet, but when you download it, you have it in Excel. And the way this model works is the first sheets include financial modeling best practices, financial modeling standards. I didn't make all of them up. They come from established standards like the FAST standard, like the ICAEW standard. That's a accounting body in the UK, and PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the big 4 audit firms. And I distilled them down to which standards apply most to work in FP&A. So when we look at workbook design, for example, you want to have separate sheets that for inputs, for calculations, for presentations, like you mentioned. There are other points as well that we don't have time to go into, but that's why I'm sharing the model here. There are things you need to consider for worksheet design, like each column should have a single purpose, ensure that all data and calculations are labeled. When it comes to formulas, what about formulas? What's important when it comes to formulas? Oh yeah. Since Abacum integrates with G Sheets and Excel, you can really get the best of both worlds. Yeah, formula needs to be simple, right? I use the rule of thumb. Have you heard about the rule of thumb? The rule of thumb is where you take your thumb, you hold it against your computer screen, and if the formula is longer than your thumb, then it's not simple enough, right? So how can you create formulas that are that short? You have to break it up. And because these standards, they sound great on paper, but you're like, okay, how what does this actually look like in practice? I put together this example model here. Credit where credit is due. This is based on a financial model that was shared by the organization called f1f9.com. Always, credit the sources. But when you look at this model, you will find that it follows all those best practices that I outline here in the beginning of this document. So for example, you have input sheets that are labeled with an I at the beginning, where you have all the inputs. And then I'll zoom out a bit more so it's easier to see. And then you have calculation sheets that have no input cells whatsoever. They only have formulas. And that's really important so that you make changes quickly, that you don't have to plug any numbers. So the model is robust and easy to update. And when you go through the model, you will see that the rule of thumb applies throughout the model. So the link should work. I just tried it again. It should work. Can you type in the chat if the link worked for you, please? Yes, okay, thank you. Okay. And then, yeah, actually, it's a very similar model that I shared in class before. And what I would encourage you to do is go to the standards and then see if you can find those in the model. That's a good way to familiarize yourself with them. Because when you just look at the standards, and that's what's so often missing when you just download Google financial modeling standards, is that you don't get an example of what they actually look like in practice. So go through them and then see if you can find them in the model itself. And yeah, I hope that will be a good way to learn how to use these financial models. Okay, so with that, we have 8 minutes left, so we want to make sure that we also have some time for Q&A and for questions. So I want to see if we can, transition to questions.
Cool. Christian Nerf, thank you so much for the mastery here across solutions. Fantastic to have seen this. I've been very excited. Best practices across platform and spreadsheets, and the integration of both probably is being at the cutting edge. Let's jump into the Q&A. We have 6 minutes left. So I've seen a number of questions coming through. So I saw Lucas actually asking, hey, if we are tight on resources, right, and pressed on time, and maybe probably not the whole bandwidth to a full rebuild right now, which modeling approach provides the most immediate value in general terms? ROI, DCF, sensitivity analysis. Maybe where would you start, Christian?
Yeah. So generally speaking, you need to use the right model type for the decision you're evaluating. If you have a long horizon takes a long time to make back the cash flow, you have to take the time value into account. You have to build a discounted cash flow model. But the thing is, if you set it up once, whether that's an Excel or an Abacum or another tool, it takes some time to do it once, but then doing it the second time is much faster, because then you can use the same model, you just change the inputs, you just adjust it. And so I would say don't take shortcuts when it comes to building the right type of model. Take shortcuts later when you do it the second time by reusing what you've built before.
Okay, that's very helpful. I'm digging out some other questions because we had a lot of activity today in the chat. So there's little gems that are a bit hidden. I'm not sure if I'll go ahead. Could you give an example of a situation where IRR indicated a different decision than NPV?
Yes. So that comes down to if you look at different types of investments. So just to give you an example, let's say you have a budget in your supply chain and you have to decide between extending the warehouse so you can have more inventory. It's often something that companies with products do, or you buy a new robot for your warehouse, where you can save costs as well and where you can move the inventory maybe faster than people can. The NPV for the robot may be slightly higher than for the warehouse extension, but the risk is also much higher. And so NPV alone is insufficient here. You need to look at IRR and at hurdle rates associated, so target rates for IRR, where your company says, well, if we do something risky like a robot, we better have 10 percentage points higher IRR than for a simple project like extending the warehouse. And you can't use NPV for that because NPV is an absolute metric and it's very difficult to set absolute targets. You want to send rate of return targets for your investments to make them comparable to each other.
Christian, thank you so much. Maybe the last question. Which model is suitable for cost tracking?
Yeah, so when it comes to cost tracking, it depends what you're tracking costs for, right? Do you want to track costs against budget, right? And a simple budget versus actual, budget versus forecast model is sufficient. But if you want to track how well those costs help you deliver against a certain goal, right? Deliver against more revenue, more sales, then you need to use one of the models that I shared. So then you need to look at ROI or payback. If you have a longer period, you look at discounted cash flow, or maybe even lifetime value, because some costs, for example, if you're a subscription-based company, if you track marketing expenses, you should always compare them against the lifetime value of the product. So not just the sales of your product, but you also consider how sticky it is, right? How long people stay subscribed. That's part of the customer lifetime value formula. And then you compare that to your costs, to your marketing costs, to see how well do those dollars working? Are we spending enough? Are we spending too little? So when it comes to cost tracking, the type of model depends entirely on what your goal is.
Christian, thank you so much. Hopefully this was very helpful to everyone. I think it's time to wrap it up. Maybe we can squeeze in a last question that I see coming through. But okay, we have a number of questions. We can, so I'll just get for subscription models, which one do you recommend?
Yeah, so for subscription models, you have to look at customer lifetime value, right? Customer lifetime value is calculated by taking how the average value of a purchase times how many times the customer purchases from you in a given year, let's say 12 if you have a monthly subscription, times how many years that customer is expected to stay subscribed to you, right, until they churn. And the interesting thing, though, is you can combine customer lifetime value with, for example, a discounted cash flow model. That's what I did when we were at Squarespace, because we had different products that launched at different times. And so you need to take the time value of money into account, and you can combine the two even. Then you get into more complexity and, it starts to become difficult to explain. But in some situations, you have to go down that route, right? Like I mentioned, if you have investments that occur and cash flows that occur at different periods. So there's sometimes when you look at a long period of time, and often when you want to evaluate customer lifetime value, you need to look at a long period of time because most people stay subscribed for more than a year, right? And so that's where the time value of money comes in as well.
Awesome. So insightful, as always, Kristen. Thank you so much. It's now time to wrap up. Thank you so much again for the insightful session today. Also, to bring things together, right? We've just concluded a 3-session masterclass series with Christian on increasing the quality of your decision making, right? So you can access other episodes in the Abacum website, or actually just reach out to our marketing team, and then they will make them available to you. This is high quality content that Christian has created, and it's just a blast to put this at your disposal. Hey, today we've seen that in the middle of so much economic and macroeconomic uncertainty, operational speed driving faster decisions of high quality with high confidence levels, right? Using MPV together with IRR and so on, right? Using these methodologies will make you shine in your organizations from the finance function, regardless if you're in accounting or in FP&A or in corporate finance, or it doesn't really matter, right? So you can actually be proactive and make this happen. And then today we also saw how with the spreadsheets or with fully fledged FP&A platforms, right, that can accelerate your journey into driving these decisions faster and better throughout the company. So hopefully this masterclass series was interesting for every one of you. Christian, it was fantastic. It was the second round. So, really appreciate this.
Thank you. Such a pleasure talking about one of my favorite topics, financial modeling. And thanks so much for having me today.
Awesome. Nerf, thank you so much for joining as well. I appreciate this. Cool.
My absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Speak soon.
See you all. Be safe.